Hey, what's going on, y'all? I finally got into the archive and was able to put together an edit of the first kind of chapter of doing the tech demo and blueprinting for STEAV. And so this is a little bit in along the ways. I already did a video about getting here from kind of a concept, and I'm just going to kind of call out what's going on here. Where I'm at here is I'm kind of putting a level of polish onto some of the basic blueprints. I've got an object that charges the character. I've got this pad that upgrades the character's movement. This pad activates like a bigger jump. I just used a manipulation on the character movement gravity, I believe. And that was kind of a cheap trick, and I ended up changing to something else. But that's where I started. I just wanted to flesh it out and see how it felt. I used a Niagara effect just to kind of beautify it a little bit. Just give it a little indicator visual, like, hey, there's something here. It shows the cost, and then I destroyed the text render, and that comes from the stored amount of resources. I make one for increasing overall speed and one for jumping, and then I just kind of go through. I like play my game over and over and over and over again. When I'm doing the demo, not only do I iterate a blueprint, but I like to, when I feel like the blueprint's in a good spot, I like to start my demo from the beginning to see how it paces with the whole thing. Now that does add a little bit more time to my whole process, but it ends up me feeling really good about it. So here's my charge object. So what's supposed to happen is you go past them, and depending on how much it's glowing is how much it's going to charge you. I had a huge issue with this like everything went smooth on these blueprints except for this concept, and I ended up coming up with a solution using a custom curve. But this emissive effect here, basically when it's really low, it's still brighter than I would like. And so I ended up using a really flat curve in the beginning, and something like a value of 0.05 on a scale of 1 in the shader effect is what ended up creating the right kind of glow. But you can see here, it kind of starts, you wouldn't know that's brighter than I want it, but that's brighter than I want it. I want it to be super faintly dim. Like if you're paying attention, you'll see this one is glowing. Now, how that determines how much it's glowing is how close it is to the nearest resource. So it's kind of a hot-cold game. That's what I kept telling myself. I think it would just be movement interesting to see these resources at different level of glow. And this is what I first set up in this blueprint. Now, this again is just a sloppy cheat kind of, but basically I said, it's a tech demo. I'm just trying to flesh out the concept. I'll just set, a certain amount of glow per number range on the emissive effect relative to how close it is to the nearest resource object. So when you start up the game, it says, hey, how close are the resource objects to these instances? And then it sets the glow factor. That ended up being like a big nightmare. I spent probably 80% of working on this demo on that, but ended up creating an effect that I did not want to leave behind. And I learned a lot through that, especially the implementation of custom curves, I think was my favorite. Here's the new part of the demo. When I pushed this blog, this is kind of your standard block, I was like, you know what, maybe that'll be a fun mechanic. Hey, and I went on like a tangent, like wasting like 2 hours. It's not really 2 hours wasted, but I wanted to see, like, is there a really easy way I can make something in your way that, you could kind of push out of your way with some ability, and that could be a basic obstacle to this movement stuff. But after playing with it for a little while, I was like, you know what, there's no clear intent here. So let me just scrap that and go back to fleshing out movements relative to pacing your battery. And so I thought, okay, we have linear travel, just going from point A to point B on a flat Z. How about I add some Z difference? And I also had implemented already something that decreases your battery faster when you are traveling up the Z plane. That's going to be an effect here, just really exasperating that when you go up the Z plane, that your battery is going to deplete faster. And then I went and I just kind of added some charge objects kind of where I felt they might fit. I created this little underground level, just something to visually draw you to another area of the demo. And ideally it was to use this concept of, look for the glow. And there's supposed to be a charge object glowing very dimly on the edge there, but I didn't have the glow factor down right. So it just kind of like, it just looks like they're all the same anywhere. They don't tell a narrative. Like this one on the bottom left here, it's just super bright. And then the one right next to it is dark. So that was something that plagued me the whole time. These ones, they're all super bright because they're kind of close to the resource on the top right. But you see all of these, they don't tell a story. And I would keep coming back to this for probably the next 2 or 3 sessions on this, but I ended up, like I said, getting that figured out. I'm just playing through the pacing here and trying to let the feel of this mechanic tell me a story. And it kind of naturally led to that these should be building something with your resources or accumulating power-ups with your resources. And so I thought, okay, before I do that, let me jump into the UI. I just went on Canva and looked up like what's it called? This is just kind of like a space sci-fi battery meter. I just dropped it in there just to be a little stand-in so I can see what it looks like. Then I realized that, is this it right here? No, I'm not in the spawning yet. Yeah, I'm like, okay, we need to do a respawn. So, simple setup, battery goes down, when it hits 0, take you back to the starting point, recharge your battery. I have this dash mechanic that really helped me like drain the battery. And there we go, without resetting the health to 100. And then it just, every frame starts back at the starting point. But there we go. Got the respawn. And then I was like, not really sure where to go from here. I knew I was going to dive into the emissive property. So I was like, let me do some cleanup, get my head right before I dive deep into that emissive property. So I like to have clean labels. I like to have my blueprints being that if somebody fundamentally knows at all about Unreal, they could read my notes and pick up what's going down. So, and then I'm jumping. I'm like, all right, time to dive into this. What is going on here? Right now, I take a normalized vector distance between 0 and 1, and I invert it and multiply it by 100 or something to set how much it charges your battery. But also I'm using that normalized number between 0 and 1 to set the emissive factor. And I was playing with doing it times 5, times 10, times 100, not realizing that the nature of it is that it had a really flat curve at the beginning. So no matter what I did, it kept creating super bright or really dim or just completely off. And so I was like, okay, I gotta control this. So I put it on its own platform. And then I really started to dive into understanding how that works. So you can see right here, those are super bright. That one is still brighter than I would like, but there's really no in between these. That kind of looks good, but then these are all the same level of brightness, even though the resource is way, way down there. The last one should be the brightest one. These ones look just as bright as that one. And I realized the difference between emissive property on these from a value of 3 to 100 basically look exactly the same. You're basically talking about ambient light at that point and how far the light goes. And I'm just checking it out. I'm like, okay, I made a little tweak. Let's see how this goes. And now I'm just going to play through the demo as it is. I felt like I kind of got to a good point. Still not happy with the emissive property, because that was one of the core mechanics I was excited about, was the hot-cold game with the emissive property. So I know that I didn't figure that out yet. But what I got here is you got charge objects that charge you, a battery that drains, you got resources that you collect, you've got conditions on your battery depleting, which in this case would be your going down or up the Z. If you go down the Z plane, it also charges you. So regenerative charging. I've got an upgrade blueprint that creates a jetpack. I got rid of the speed one just so I could simplify this. And then that leads into, after learning that mechanic, that you can recycle your resources on the fly to create battery. And that kind of leads into the whole sci-fi, Mars Rover self-sustaining kind of concept. And then it just basically prompts you to collect enough resources to start building your base. And then that would be kind of the whole gameplay loop there. And then I would iterate creatively on top of that to basically see how the game expands from that. This is about 10 minutes, reduced from probably 6 hours of screen recording. I have probably 7 times that kind of in my files right now that I can't wait to edit and move forward. I was kind of learning how to edit this too. I've been improving kind of how I present Unreal Engine as far as the editing format. And I think I'm really happy with kind of how this went. And I'm going to get a little bit more open to the kind of teaching aspect of it, ideally. But we'll see how it goes.